That's exactly right. Oh, I'm making 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, or whatever. What do I care about 17.5 or whatever the matching contribution is? But one day that ball is going to stop bouncing. What are you going to do then? Nobody cares about what you did on the basketball court. If you're not Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, somebody like that, who cares? Who cares what you did? What are you going to contribute? What are you going to give that a legacy that others can model after? And that's really at the heart of it. The Bible says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Why aren't we doing that? And wealth is multifaceted. It's not just financial. There's spiritual wealth, which I think is the most important to determine whether you take an elevator ride up or down. Nutritional wealth, which I think is critically important. Many of us look very young. We look young, and I think genetically that's just something we're blessed with. But how do we feel on the inside? What is our quality and quantity of life as we age? We have to get serious about that. There's intellectual wealth, there's relational wealth, there's social wealth, there's all these different kinds of wealth, but financial wealth is a way to keep score. That's why we focus on that so much. And the gaps are getting wider and wider and wider in terms of comparing to us against our peers, Asians, whites, and even Hispanics to a certain degree. I wrote this book called Sociopsychonomics. Big title. Obviously a play on socioeconomics, but the one thing that's missing is the psychology. And when you play professional basketball, you really clearly see in terms of that. I grew up in public housing, so you see a lot of guys who basically buy. I love cars. I'm always going to have a nice car. I don't care. We had nothing. You remember those cars when it's puttering and it's on the stops on the side of the street? I'm always going to have a nice car. And I tell people, don't get caught up in all of that. Whatever your non-negotiables are, they're there. But you have to think about planning in all those other areas. I think it's very important. And when I wrote this book, what I learned is that everything that we're talking about really comes down to, I think, two things. And number one is emotionalism. When I think about the poor, the middle class, and the affluent, it's really what is your emotional disposition? How do you look at wealth? Because in poverty, you basically, as soon as it comes in, more than likely you're just going to spend it. The middle class, they're very fearful when it comes to investing. There have been all kinds of studies done when it comes to the middle class, and what they found out is that the middle class, even when they're given hypothetical amounts of money, me and my wife, we do workshop seminars all around the country. We create apps to actually help people learn about financial wellness. And there's a young man right here. This young man right here, he saw me, he gave me a hug right here. He's from Columbus, Ohio. I had no idea he was going to be here. He said, Mr. Fundy, man, I love you, man. It's great to see you. He's been in our camps and our programs for many, many years, and he's seen. And we're teaching people the tools to be successful, because many of us have never been taught. The Bible says, taste and see that the Lord is good. But how can you taste success when you've never even seen it? You can't taste it. But we have to think about a comprehensive approach. If we don't, and I think 2054, what is it going to be, a negative net worth or something like that? What legacy are we going to leave behind? Because we can come in here, we can get all this information, we can come and listen to all this, but when are we going to actually put something together? And yes, there's going to always be racism. There's going to always be these issues. They're not going away anytime soon. But what you can control is what you're responsible for. And then in closing, I want to say this as I wrap up. And I shared this earlier today. And many of us, and this is big for me because the Lord convicted me. When you grow up in an environment, right, you grow up, people abandon you, people take advantage of you, you have this bitterness and this anger. And the Lord, He convicted me, says, Lawrence, you have to forgive people. Doesn't mean you excuse them. As a matter of fact, you hold them accountable. You cast a spotlight on the injustices at the same time, but you still have to walk in forgiveness. And I have people say, you can't hold people hostage. You had nothing to do with your childhood pain. So the Lord really convicted me on that because I had a lot of anger and bitterness in my heart toward people who did me wrong, particularly white people. So forgiveness is key. And then the second thing the Lord wanted me to share, and this is from all my Christian brothers and sisters, is that whatever Jesus is not Lord of, He's not responsible for. If you're a Christian, if you have not placed your finances in His hands or your temperament, anything, He's not responsible for them. And number one, you have to forgive people before you even come to Him in prayer and say, God, can you please bless me? And then the third one is why I wrote this book, is you need a comprehensive game plan. We got to stop winging it in terms of trying to be successful financially. It's not going to work. We have to have a game plan, stop being emotional and being intentional. God bless you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Forgive my tardiness, and you're going to have to double forgive me, but he says you got to forgive everybody. Because I'm supposed to be in two places at one time. I'm on the National Commission for Reparations for African Americans, and we're meeting down hall somewhere. So, but I'm really delighted to be here. I want to convey my thanks to the Congressman for including me, and miss this young lady, but I know her and I've seen her.
I was going to say, it's not every day you end up on a panel with your board member. So
I was delighted, though, to see that you're on the panel. This young man, I'm going to get this book. It's really great. So it's just really great to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing. I have a book that I'm working on now. It's called Black Money, Then, Now, and in the Future. So in the then part, which is what I'm going to talk about then today, I look at some things, what we had, what we have, and what we could have, what we had. It's important for us to understand that even at the end of Reconstruction, we were some very entrepreneurial, focused people. We once had over 100 black-owned banks. Now we have 22. But it's very interesting. The second chapter looks at Black Wall Street, and there are 3 Black Wall Streets, not only Tulsa, Oklahoma, which we all know about, but also there's an area in Durham, North Carolina that was called Black Wall Street, and there's also in Jackson Ward in Richmond, Virginia, there's an area that was called Black Wall Street. So looking at the then, and now the future question is, what could we do with $1.3 trillion? That's our spending power. We could fund every HBCU. We could do everything that we needed to do. We have the dollars. I think what you're saying is we don't have the temperament. One of the things that really, as I was working on my book, the deposits of our 22 black-owned banks add up to about $5 billion out of $1.3 trillion. So we think the white man's ice is cold. And I ain't forgiving white folks, and I am a Christian. I just can't do it. But let me talk about the bank that was the longest tenured bank, because this sister has just gotten in my head. In fact, my publisher is annoyed with me. She says, stop worrying about Maggie Lena Walker, do what you're supposed to be doing. But Maggie, who has heard of Maggie Lena Walker? Well, this is good. But all of y'all should have heard of her. Maggie Lena Walker was the first black woman to charter a bank. She chartered St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank in Richmond, Virginia in 1903. She gave a speech in which she said, what we need to do is further develop and prosper. What do we need to do to further develop and prosper us numerically and financially? First, we need a savings bank, chartered, officered, and run by women and men of this order. Let's put our monies together. Let's put our money together at usury among ourselves. She goes on to talk about how this is what she said. Let us have a bank that will take the nickels and turn them into dollars. And so this woman was a visionary. Now, that's the first thing you should know about her. Everybody knows about Madam CJ. but very few people know about Maggie Lena. And I don't want you to forget her because her contribution was so important. Now, after she started St. Luke's Bank, and it was a very interesting time, because I was learning more about Richmond, Virginia, and learning more about our history. You know, white people are crazy. I mean, truly, really, simply, you can't figure some of the stuff out that they figured out. So they passed a law in 1924 that said a black person could not live on a block that was predominantly white. Now, you could own property, but you could not live in your property. So you had to rent it to white people. That was the only way that you could. Some people actually went to their city council and asked for exemptions. So that, so literally on a case-by-case basis, you had to go and say, you know, I need to live in my own self-house. Cray. I mean, how do you think, I mean, really, when you think about racism, it's like, how do you think up this stuff? You know, what kind of brain do you have? But clearly, the 1924 period is a period, that period before the Great Depression. It was also a period, you start from 1917, we'll go to red summer of 1919, where you basically had black men coming back from World War I who were not predisposed to take a lot of stuff. So that they basically were not planning to take, not only a lot, any stuff. These were brothers who were armed. And so if you look at the Tulsa, Oklahoma story, lots of drama, but basically a white girl who was an elevator operator stopped the elevator, brother jostled her, and the next thing you know, it was rape. I mean, that was a narrative that went out. But there's a lady, she's still living, her name is Dr. Olivia Hooker, she's 103, she's amazing, and she's the only living survivor of Tulsa. And she's sharp as a tack, most days. But at 103, you would have to be sharp. But anyway, Dr. Hooker says that whites had begun to stockpile guns before this incident occurred, and that they really wanted something to jump off. They were just waiting for some excuse. So when Dick Roland, who was a brother, white girl's name was Sarah Page, when Dick Roland bumped into Sarah Page, this turned into, this is a rape. They went and got the brother, they had him in a jail. The black men of Tulsa went with their guns and said, this ain't happening. And because white men saw black men with guns, the next thing that happened, essentially, is they destroyed 35 square blocks of black property, 35 square blocks. The losses are estimated at a couple $1 million in that money, not in today's money. Dr. Hooker, her dad owned a department store, and she likes to talk about how she said we had everything we needed in Tulsa except the bank. Everything. So you didn't have to leave the hood. I mean, everything you wanted was literally right there. But anyway, that was kind of a side note. As you can tell, I'm kind of like into this book, and so I'm just all over the place, but it's really interesting. But now, back to Maggie Lena. In 1920, so that time period is an interesting time period. Finding all kinds of, they call it the massacre in East St. Louis that happened in 1917. Similar story. Some brothers, basically, if some white men shot into somebody's house, the brother said it ain't happening no more. So somebody else came, but it was policemen. You know how that goes down. And brothers shot back, and the policeman died. And they put the bloody car, they left it on the street for everybody to see. So the crazy people, since I'm sitting next to you, I'm a hat in the fur. I lied. Anybody who knows me knows I would do that. But anyway, white people went into the community and just tore it up. Literally just tore it up. So they say that it was over $600,000 worth of damage. Over 200 black people lost their lives. Now, you know, it's also always interesting when they can't figure out how many people died. So it's approximately. So I saw one newspaper that said 35 people died, but I saw another one that said 200. I'm going to go with the 200 number. Because we know about destruction. But in any case, Maggie Lena, in this time period, started to see, because Virginia had passed all these laws to make it more difficult for black people to accumulate. They had passed new laws regulating banks. There was a great bank, the Fairness Bank, that went out of business in 1921. They said the brother was arrogant. He was. I read some of his stuff, but that doesn't mean he couldn't have a bank. But anyway, his bank went out of business. So they went from 11 black-owned banks to 5 in a very short time period because of new regulation. Magdalena went to two of the others and said, look, guys, it's 1929, after the Depression started, look, guys, we're all going to be out of business if we don't consolidate. So St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank became Consolidated Bank, and it actually existed in Richmond from 1903 until 2005. It went out of business. My dear friend Doyle Mitchell, who's the president of Industrial Bank, told me I'm not supposed to say this, but I have to say it anyway because I say whatever. Dumb black men. That's how the business bank got out of business. He said to just say bad loans. I just say dumb black men. I'm not going to write down dumb black men in my book. But what we have to understand when we talk about black economic development is that banks are businesses. So a lot of people think, I put my money in black banks, so the black bank has to lend me money. No. If you are a poor risk, the black bank does not have to lend you money. In fact, the black bank will do itself a disservice if it lends you money. One of the banks that I look at in the banking chapter, I look at 3 banks. So I look at Magdalena for historical context, and then I look at industrial, because Industrial Bank here in Washington started during the Depression. So that's fascinating. And then One United Bank was used to be Unity Bank in Boston, way back in the day, like when I was an undergrad. So that was way back in the day. But they ended up consolidating 4 banks. So I look at them as a parallel to St. Luke's. One United got into a big fight with the church that took out this big old loan, and then they didn't want to pay it back. And they said, they tried all kinds of stuff. They even got Charles Ogletree involved. He wrote a letter saying, can't you show the banks some mercy? The answer to that is hell to the no. I mean, this is a business. We have to collect the money, and their thinking was, the church's thinking was, well, some of this insurance, you'll get some of the money back. They went to court, and they got their money, which I fully support. But in any case, just looking at black banking, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do we only have $5.3 billion deposited in black-owned banks when we have $1.3 trillion? This means that we have less than 5% of our annual income, in black-owned banks. What's wrong with us? Now, people will tell you the black banks don't have the same services. That's just not true. One United actually is an internet bank. They do have some challenges, but it's an internet bank. So you can do all kinds of things online. Industrial also. I mean, the Doyle gets a little annoyed when I tell them, when United, they call themselves the biggest national internet bank. And Doyle's like, well, that's not quite the truth. Well, but we're going to let all the black people have bragging rights, because we believe black people have bragging rights when they have something to brag about. But in any case, and when we don't, just be quiet. But in any case, we have not looked at black banking in the ways that we should when we talk about economic development. Now, why bank black? 67% of our loans come from black-owned banks. Black-owned banks give us more loans than anybody else does. So black banks will work with you in ways that other banks will not. You've heard of the thin file and the thick file? The thin file is you filled out the application, they say, no, you can't have no money. Excuse my ebonics, but we code switch. So they'll tell you, you can't have a loan. A black bank will sit with you. In fact, One United and Industrial have programs where they will teach you how to qualify for a loan. So their black-owned banks are invested in our financial literacy and our financial mobility. Given that, the question becomes, why are we not investing in our own banks? With the 22 banks, there's no excuse for all of these banks not to be thriving. There's no excuse for us not to have at least 10%, of our dollars basically invested in those banks. But we have chosen not to invest in those banks for reasons that are unbeknownst to me. It's probably in this book. Now, the distrust story is very interesting also. Everybody heard about Freedman's Bank, the first bank, and everybody heard that it failed. It did not fail because of Frederick Douglass. It did not fail because of white people. Black people. It failed because of white people. The board of that bank were white bankers. So but the Freedman's Bank example, people will still tell you about it. People will still tell you, this is why I don't bank black, because Freedman's Bank failed in 18 what? So all banks are, black banks are supposed to be suspect. But other banks have failed too. Banks do fail. And that's why the FDIC insures us up to, I believe it's $100,000. So I'm going to take my seat or take something. But anyway, what I hope that I've left you with is a bit of our economic history, number one, an appreciation for Maggie Dita Walker, number two, and number three, an opportunity for you to check yourself. If you are not banking black, ask yourself, why not? Just ask yourself, now there may be reasons. You may have reasons. But if you don't, but if your reason is that the white man's ice is colder, shame on you. That's all I got to say. Thank
you. Good afternoon. So my name is Charles Wilson. I am here in a couple of capacities. The first is that I, 2 months ago, took a position at an organization called Associated Builders and Contractors of Illinois, and I took over as their Director of Workforce Development and Safety. The other capacity is in my consulting firm, CW Consulting Group, and it was something that was birthed out of what I'm about to share with you regarding why I'm sitting here. My whole purpose is effectively the solution side, to bridge the gap. In 2015, I was honored to be asked by Congressman Bobby Rush on, can't make this up, right? I was honored to be asked by Congressman Rush to speak before his body, the Energy and Power Subcommittee in the U.S. House. And it was specifically with him as the ranking member, him writing the 21st Century Workforce Bill. Let me hold on and determine if we need to defer to Congressman Rush for some words. All right. So with that said, I asked him, so I was in Philadelphia at the time, and I get a call from one of his lead policy guy. He said, hey Charles. I said, hey, what's going on? He's like, it was actually a voicemail. He said, give me a call back. The congressman wants you to come to DC and testify before Congress. That was my voicemail. I had a sidecar in my hand. And I'm like, let me call him back. It was John. I said, John, what are you talking about? I said, the Congress said come out here. He's writing a bill, 21st Century Workforce Bill. And the purpose is to charge the Department of Energy to support organizations, institutions who are serving people of color, women, veterans, and pipelining them to careers in the energy and manufacturing space. I said, well, what does he want me to say? He said, do that thing you do. So with that said, I am from the south side of Chicago, a neighborhood named Inglewood, which serves as probably the epicenter and prime example of the type of violence, poverty that really makes up, when we think of some of our blighted neighborhoods, it is really an example of that. I was born to a single mother and two younger sisters. A father who I just found out in November died because I was not aware that he was still alive. And in my home were roaches and rats. The door would open and they would fall from the top of the door when we came into the home. I remember not getting out of the bed because I could hear the rats walking out in the kitchen, in the pantry. I could hear the rice and the beans fall as they were ripping open bags that we received from a truck. Because when you're on public aid, the food stamps run out probably around the 15th to 17th of the month. And so we would go to a place about 1.5 miles away, and they had the government cheese and the peanut butter, which I found out the way you do not use that peanut butter is you don't attempt to spread it. If you attempt to spread this peanut butter, you will find that the bread will roll with it. What you should do instead is take that spoon, slide it on the side of the corner, and fold the bread around it. And I recall with my last name being Wilson, going to school, and people, in elementary school, you're told to walk in a line to go to the bathroom in alphabetical order, and I always appreciated that because I was a Wilson. And then the teacher would get excited sometimes and want to bring equity and have the last names go first. And I hated that. Because what happens when you walk? A person can see the bottom of your shoes. You looked at the bottom of my shoes, you saw my socks coming out the holes that were worn into the bottom of them. I remember Pink Tag Tuesday at the Unique Thrift Store. And I remember going there because most of the clothes were half off at that time. And I was in there trying to find which pants were not worn out the most, which underwear did not have streaks in them, so that I can wear them. I remember my mother crying every night when she would go to bed, and it was because she felt that she failed us, that she couldn't provide for us the life that she had hoped that she could. She had my father who did his part, and my younger sisters, they have the same father, and he told her he would take care of her if she needed to. And he left her after she had the second child. So here she was under the age of 23 with 3 children and no man. My freshman year going into high school, I told my mother, you will never have to pay for anything else for me moving forward. She used to call me her little man because I would go to the corner store and I would ask people if I can help them with their groceries. And I would carry their bags. And I would take the change. And when we got toward the end of the month, I would go to that other corner store and get $1 worth of lunch meat, $1 worth of cheese and bread. And we have dinner for at least a couple of nights. I'm saying this for a reason. I go through high school. My senior year, my mother told me I couldn't go to my prom because we were a very Christian household, because they played worldly music. I said, Mom, I'm going to prom. That's like, you got to go to prom. They're singing, we're talking about. She said, you're not going to prom. I said, I pay bills. I pay half the bills. Like, I give you half my check. So I'm telling you, you're not going. I'm going. She's like, well, since you're grown, why don't you go ahead and get out? 16, about 2 months before I turned 18, my mother kicked me out the house in my senior year. Now, I delivered pizzas. And I remember going to stay with this guy that some would call a father. I went and stayed with him, found out he was selling drugs in his house. I also found out he was using the drugs. And he would get his drugs at some discount for selling them by the drug dealer. As soon as I moved in, he told me I was being charged $350 a month for my bedroom. On that note, I left. And I was effectively homeless. I stayed in the back porch of my godmother's home for the rest of my senior year. Senior year, I graduated. And people said, what are you planning on doing when you graduate? Not die. That was the plan I had growing up on the south side of Chicago, was to not be dead when I graduated high school. So I had no post-secondary plan. It was to not be dead. I moved in with my girlfriend, who was a ward of the state. And in our second month of graduation, and I want to be clear, they have an independent living program for wards of the states. And no one is supposed to be living with you. So when the case manager would come, I'd be in the closet, quietly, ensuring that she couldn't hear me. We became pregnant 2 months after I graduated, and now I'm trying to figure out what's next. I get a call from one of my best friends. He says, hey, Charles, what you doing? I said, delivering pizzas. He said, I'm joining the Navy. I need one more person, and they'll advance me 1 rank if I can get this one more person. I said, yeah? He said, yeah. I said, okay, well, sign me up. I go in, I take the test. I went to a pretty nice high school. It's called Lynn Bloom Technical High School. And they focused on the maths and the sciences. And when I took this test, I looked up and I had a pretty high score. I'm like, oh man, it's going down. They came and said, hey, you scored high enough to where you qualify to take this nuclear operations exam. I'm like, nuclear? Because I'm nuclear. Like, nuclear to me is, you talking about bombs? I'm doing that with mine. Like, no, dude, nuclear operations. I'm like, okay. So it's me and 5 other white guys, and they're in there very comfortable with the idea of this nuclear thing. Like, yeah, you know, hard to swallow. You know, my dad's a nuke, and my brother's a nuke, and they're going, I'm like, this nuke, what is this we're talking about? And so we take the test for our exam, and I remember at the end, they called me, they said, Wilson, come in, go in the room. I'm like, now look, this school that you'll be going to is in Orlando, and it'll be 2 years. I'm like, what are you talking about? said for the nuclear school. I'm like, where's everybody else? It's like, you're the only one that passed. Okay. He told me I was going to Orlando. I said, you talking about where Mickey at? you talking about the palm trees? And I couldn't believe it because I'd never even been on a plane before. And people don't understand that in these types of cities, there's truly a tale of two cities. Downtown Chicago was like another country for me. We stayed in our boundary, we stayed in our radius. I went to the school 2 years. 65% of the people that went through this school failed out. 95% of people of color failed out. And I went through it, got selected to not only do and be certified as a nuclear mechanical operator, but as a nuclear chemist. I went through this, I leave there, I was in the Navy for 6 years. I was on board submarines. I give that for a reason. And I went on something metal that was made to sink. For 3 years, 3 months at a time, 5 separate times. No phones, no emails, no any of that. Except these 850-word familygrams where they get to tell you, hey, dog died. And if there's anything in there that can mess with you emotionally, they would block it out. Because they didn't need you to spaz out with 160 people on a tube underwater because you found out that your wife is pregnant with your brother, by your brother. Which were the kind of things that people came home to, with their bank accounts empty, with their woman being pregnant, or something like that. So they didn't want you to lose it with having 159 other people on the ship with you. I came back to Chicago. I intended to go to school for finance. And then I got a call from a company, an energy company, and they offered me a position as a nuclear chemist. They said, we're going to start you at $28 an hour. Now, I'm giving you these things for a reason. They said $28. I said, wait a minute. When we start? They said, well, can you start today? Yes, I can. And so we got incremental increases to $35 an hour in 1 year. From the age of 25 up until this point, I never made less than $100,000 a year. Now, I'm saying that because I did not have a degree. I never told you I had a degree. And when I looked around in this industry and I found that there were not people like me making this kind of money, which is why I created the consulting company, to show people within our communities that the wealth creation and wealth generation comes from being given an opportunity to compete. We first have to be made aware that the opportunities exist. That means people coming into the communities that we are to show us and tell us that these opportunities exist, and then be given access. And so when I do my part as we do this discussion, I'll be sharing some of those things that I found to be part of awareness and the access for people of color to take advantage of opportunities for that wealth creation.
All right, you doing the PowerPoint? No. So I'm Bill Cunningham. I'm an economist, and I'm delighted to be on this panel. You lead it? That's quite all right. So I'm the numbers guy, right? I'm the numbers guy. I'm the guy who tells you your bank account is overdrawn. I'm not responsible for your bank account being overdrawn. I'm just the guy that tells you what the situation is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the macro numbers. Here's the other thing to keep in mind. I'm a macro economist. All right? We're going to talk about micro versus... How many people took economics in college? See, so y'all all know this stuff, all right? The issue is this with respect to wealth. Wealth is a macro concept, okay? All of the individual efforts are individual efforts. They are micro in nature. You cannot change a macro concept with micro strategies. So let's go over some of the numbers, please. Next slide. Which one? Which button? Thank you. Which button? Let's see. Give me a second. Samantha, you got it? All right. So if we're going to start to talk about wealth, we need to know how much wealth there is in the United States of America. There is $100 trillion worth of wealth in the United States of America. $100 trillion worth of wealth in the United States of America. Let's take a look at how it's broken up. There's 34 trillion in households. There's 13 trillion in non-financial, non-corporate, basically small businesses. There's 36 trillion is the market value of all of the corporations in the United States of America. 36 trillion market value, and we know that 1 trillion of that is Amazon. Okay, so that's important. That's important. If you have one company that's 1/36 of the total, it implies that they can control your lives in a way that we haven't seen before. It's important. And then 14 trillion in federal, state, and local government assets. Everybody talk. Well, before I go any further, let me mention a couple people. Carnell Scruggs is here from Nashville, Tennessee. I wrote a book on crowdfunding. Carnell got it, called me up, said, I want to support you, whatever you're doing. Thank you, Carnell. And then we also have Dean Bellamy from Georgetown Law School. I think he's here. Dean Bellamy, there you go. First black dean at a major law school. He's been there 30 years. And of course, my sister, Stephanie Flood. Where is she? Where is she? There she is. All right. I gotta give her a shout out because she cooks Thanksgiving dinner. Okay. And if I don't give her a shout out, I'm not gonna. She hates it when I say that, but it's true. So $100 trillion in total wealth. What we're going to do is talk about where black people fit within this context. This is the global context. Next slide, please. All right, now so here's where we fit. For every dollar of white family wealth, black families have 10 cents. If you take out automobiles, black families have 2 cents. 2 cents. For every dollar of wealth that white families have. Places this stuff in context. Now, we've talked a lot about buying power. The thing you got to understand is 2 things. Number one, buying power is a concept that relates to income, not wealth. Income, not wealth. And the $1.2, $1.3 trillion in black wealth that everybody is talking about, we're short by about $1 trillion. We're short by about, so don't get excited about 1.2 trillion. It should be 2.2 trillion. I'm calculating that based on the total spending in the country, and if black people are 13% of the population, if we had 13% of that spending, it would come up to $2.2 trillion. We have $1.2 trillion. That difference is pure white supremacy and white racism. That's all it is. Next slide, please. Drop the lights on me. Alright, so here's the breakout by race. White families have a median wealth of $171,000. Asian families have median wealth of $64,000. Hispanic families have median wealth of $20,000. And black median wealth is $17,600. The reason I put this slide up is because of the Hispanic slide. All right? They just got here. And they got more wealth than we do. Once again, I ain't mad at any wealth. But the point is that proves that racial discrimination and white supremacy is the main driver of the wealth gap. That's all it is. Because if it wasn't, their median wealth would be lower than ours. Ours would be higher than theirs. But it's not. So next slide, please. All right, again, this is no accident. The system is designed to benefit whites. How do you know this? Family characteristics, marriage rates, education, and differences in ability do little to explain the black-white wealth gap. Little to explain it, okay? And racism is focused on black men. It's focused on black men. It has been historically because the black-white income gap is driven entirely by differences between black and white male income and occupational prospects over the course of a 40 or 50-year career. That's how you get, and it's generational. It goes back years and years and years and years and years and years. That's how you get this black-white welfare gap. And again, you can be sure because Hispanic Americans are moving up the income distribution across generations. Black Americans are not. It's all the evidence you need. Next slide, please. All right. Now we get to the tough part. Again, I'm just the numbers guy. I'm just the numbers guy. I'm going to tell you kind of what the deal is. Number one, black businesses, growing black businesses cannot affect the black-white income gap and wealth gap in any meaningful sense over the long term, because black businesses and banks cannot thrive on a separate and unequal playing field. Okay? Number two, single motherhood family. You're going to talk, well, you know, black people, you need to stop having all these babies. Look. Single motherhood is a reflection of inequality. It's not a cause. It's not a cause. Okay? It's a reflection of historically what's been going on. So you can't look at family structure and attribute the black-white welfare and wealth and income gap to that. You can't. Okay? Number three, at education. At every level of educational attainment. I have a master's in economics and an MBA in finance from the University of Chicago. My income is lower than my white. Firstly, there are no white guys that have both degrees. Right? I started that program. Right? But even the guys that have one of those degrees, the white guys make a lot more money than I do. A lot more money. So what that shows you is that, and it's not just me, I'm looking at the macro numbers. At every level of educational attainment, black families' median wealth is substantially lower than their white counterparts. And then finally, home ownership. Home ownership is important. No question about it. These are individual efforts, however, they will not move the macro needle. You know that because among home households that own a home, white households have $140,000 more in net worth than comparable black households. Okay? It's a system, people. It's a system. No matter what you do, it's designed to keep you below white people with respect to wealth. Next slide, please. All right, and yeah, this is another tough slide. This is another tough slide. I'm just warning you. Emulating successful minorities will not close the racial wealth gap. One of the reasons is that how many people live in neighborhoods where they have these Chinese chicken joints, you know? They came into our neighborhoods, created these businesses, hired their own people, didn't share any of that wealth with you. No employment opportunities. So you can't, unless you're going to do that, you can't use emulation as a successful strategy. Small business, entrepreneurship, also. Black people own businesses in terms of percentage of wealth. It's about 7% of black wealth. For white people, small businesses represent about 14% of their wealth. So entrepreneurship is not the answer. All right? Soft skills. They talk about, you know, oh, well, black people need more personal responsibility. No. That's just not going to do it. At a macro level, at a micro level, yes. Be personally responsible. No question about it. I'm not saying that you should. I'm just a numbers guy. I'm just looking at the broad stuff, okay? So that's not going to do it. And then saving more. Black people are already master financiers. Master. We turn, a dime into a dollar more frequently than any other group. Better than any other group. So saving more is not going to do it. All right? So again, sorry to be the skunk at the ballroom, but you know, that's kind of what the deal is. Now, let me tell you what I think will work. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that none of this will work in terms of closing the black-white wealth gap without a strong legal strategy. And when I say strong legal strategy, what I mean is employment. EEOC worked in the 60s and 70s to significantly increase black male employment opportunities. They got Clarence, Uncle Tom, Clarence, what was Clarence Thomas? Clarence. He came in and destroyed the EEOC. That's what he did. And when you started to see black male occupational opportunities turn around very quickly, very dramatically, during his entire term there, that's why they made him a Supreme Court justice. So what you need to do is to repair that gap. So that's what I would say. All right? And The other thing you need to do, enforce the civil rights laws that already exist across the board. Across the board. Home ownership, finance, schools, everything. We have the laws. The laws are on the books. We know that they're simply not being enforced. Okay? Finance too. Right? Now, in terms of finance, what's the financial strategy? Credit unions. Credit unions. Banks are not going to help you. Banks, black, white, look, I know Roland Mitchell. My father graduated from Howard University, and the place that he went to get his first small business loan to open his architectural company was Industrial Bank of Washington, because they were tied to Howard University. And when you graduated from the dental school or from the medical school or from the architecture school, what you used to do is you used to go down there to, 14th and U, where their branch is, and you'd go in and see Roland Mitchell Sr. And he would take a look at your degree from Howard University, and he would make you a loan so you could hang up your shingle if you were a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer or an architect. That no longer happens. That no longer, and we know Howard is going. Is Howard majority white? But it's going there, right? Y'all know I agree with closer to the door here, okay? But as you know, when I went there, it was 99.9% black. I was up there about a month ago. The demographics of the school and the neighborhood have changed. And it's going to continue to move in that direction. That's all I'm saying. So, credit unions. Credit unions are fairer institutions with respect to black people. Credit unions are fairer institutions. The National Credit Union Administration is the place to go to get a list of all of the credit unions in the United States. I'm suggesting that black people put a lot of focus on credit unions. They just have a better track record from a macro perspective with respect to black people. Now, the last thing is we need a platform. We need a media platform. Right? We know that Trump has one. It's called Fox News. You know? And it is now the most popular media network in the country. How did Fox News start off? How did Fox start off? By broadcasting Living Single, right? Right? They created that network on the basis of black participation and black consumers. And then they used that platform to basically deny us rights. So we need to actually look at, I'm just suggesting, that we need to look at creating another a platform that specifically speaks to us and speaks to our issues. And it's impossible to close that black-white wealth gap without that type of media representation. Because otherwise, the stereotypes about the lack of black competence will continue to be broadcast. And that will serve to limit the ability of black men to get and exercise occupational opportunities. So this all syncs together. This all syncs together. And then lastly, buying power. Certainly buying power is important. I'm not saying that it's not important. But we do need to look at a strategy that allows us to partner with institutions that have shown that they've looked out for our interests. One of those institutions is Nike. Nike, you may or may not like it, but Nike has a long track record of supporting African-American male athletes. And we need to look for other opportunities like that in order to enhance our buying power and also show the power that we have in a free market system. So I think that's about it. I think I'm about done right now. I'm going to head out of here. But I appreciate you. I'll move you around. I guess we're doing questions. The Congressman, do you want to make a statement? No. Okay, right. I don't want to build a church for this. Yeah.
Well, we are at 5:04. So I'll ask a few questions and we'll open up to the audience. Most of my questions, you guys hit a lot of things we want to talk about, home ownership. I want to talk about where will we go? You know, if we're going to make any of the changes you suggest there, Bill, what do you anticipate, or how do you think about going about it? What happens? Do you have to create an organization that starts pushing that way, or do you create how do you, that's a big task you've laid out there. What does that look like?
Well, the first thing you have to do is know that you have a problem. Recognizing that you have a problem is always the first step. Recognizing you have a problem is always the first step in solving. So simply being in rooms like this and having a divergence of opinions about the problem, but at least having that conversation in an honest, open way, in a space which is relatively safe. I mean, and as you know, safe spaces for black people are shrinking. So this is Starbucks, Philadelphia. So this is part of the issue. Then the other thing I think you do is that, partnering with National Credit Union Administration, if you're going to go the credit union strategy route, to both get more black credit unions created, but also to incentivize the existing credit unions to reach out to black customers. That's one of the things I would do. On the media platform side, I would have a hackathon where you bring in a bunch of these young, I go to a lot of hackathons around blockchain, Bitcoin, other technologies. And I've seen how they have worked. And I think you bring in a bunch of young people, do it at Howard University, do a black media platform creation hackathon at Howard University. You get somebody to put up a $1 million prize, and you say, we're just looking for good ideas. If you agree that we need our own independent black media platform, and that online is the way to do it. I think those would be some of the steps. On the home ownership side, energy efficient mortgages. Energy efficient mortgages. It's something that we came up with back in 2002. The idea is that black homeowners live in houses that are energy inefficient. So, to the extent that you can make those properties more energy efficient, then your operating cost goes down. It might only be a couple $100, but that matters. That matters, And that also reduces the probability of loan default, right? Because you have $200 more in terms of the mechanics, in terms of how the finance, the numbers work, basically it means that you should qualify for a lower interest rate because the default, the risk has gone down.
This question is for all this is targeted towards you. Studies show that roughly 70% of Americans don't have $1,000 at their disposal. Half the big capitalists don't have $500 they can use. And about 42% of Americans don't have $250. So based on all your economic strategies, how do you work with that? How do you work with someone in those circumstances?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you kind of the Mr. Fundy's financial life skills playbook. There's kind of 5 areas, and obviously you're not taking notes. You just get a little flyer, and I can give that information to you. Number 1, this is a point guard. I didn't play point guard. I played center and power forward, but the most important position on the basketball court is what? Point guard. Point guard controls the tempo of the game. It's the coach out there, and for many of us, we've never really assessed, and I haven't heard this, in terms of life planning. And number 1, we have to have some values. And values are guiding principles that shape your daily decisions, actions, and activities. If you do not have a value system, by default, that is your value system. So we have to start there. We have to have some values. What do we want? What do we value? For me, there's 3 non-negotiables in terms of our household. Number 1 is we value relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. He's our anchor. That's what we start. That's first and foremost above everything. So my faith. Number 2 is family. My wife is back there. We've been married 20 years. We are in a covenant marriage, not a contract. If you're in a contract, you can break it. But in a covenant, you cannot. And that's a very important issue, too, in terms of that marriage. It's very important. And then the last one is food. I grew up like you, my brother, the grilled cheese sandwiches. They lock you up too now. And I remember about food, and I do something even to this day where I'm not hungry anymore, but I am haunted. And I'll go into the refrigerator, and my kids think I'm nuts, and I would just open the refrigerator and I would just stare at the food. My wife's back here; she can attest, like, man, Daddy, you crazy. But I remember when you would look in the refrigerator, many of you know what I'm talking about. And there's nothing in there to eat. You can only eat saliva sandwiches only for so long.
Yeah.
You need some nourishment. You need some food. So I said that was a non-negotiable for our household, making sure that we had the food. So you need values. Next thing, you need some goals. Okay, we know goals. The next one I think is a big one is we need to understand our life's purpose. What is our mission? What is the assignment we were placed on this earth to accomplish? That's first and foremost. And many of us have never really assessed that. And then the other one is legacy. Legacy is critically important, and many of us have never really assessed what legacy do we want to leave behind for others to follow. And I know when we go on vacation with our family, and I love to go to tropical places, I love to run. Running is, I think I was born to run. My coaches said, Lawrence, you run uphill on defense, but you run downhill on offense. And I love to run. And I remember when we're walking on the beach, my wife is standing next to me, and I have my kids. My daughter, she's a teenager, she's rough with teenage kids, and I have a son. And my son is trying to walk into my footprint. And when I take long steps, he's trying to jump into my footprint. And he told me, he says, Daddy, I want to be just like you when I grow up. Now, my daughter didn't say that, by the way. But we have to think about legacy. We have to think about a life playbook for success. The second one is when it comes to savings is we need to understand how much should we be saving. I mean, we should be saving between they say typically 3 to 6 months of your net income in terms of a liquid account. Savings account, checking account, money market account, something like that. We need to know the rules of the game as well. We're going to be punished severely for that. How much house should we own? Anybody know how much house times your income? 1.5. 1.5, maybe 2, 2.5. When the housing market collapsed, many people were buying homes 5 and 10 times their income. And when you don't know the rules of the game, you're punished for it. How much we should save, how much we should have for retirement, investment is a big thing. How much should you have? Here's a rule of thumb when it comes to that. You take your estimated living expenses that you want in retirement annually. Let's just say $100,000. And you multiply that times 25. And that's how much money you want to need to avoid running out of money in retirement. That would mean you would need about $2.5 million. And particularly a lot of us, we do not have assets to be able to sustain us when that retirement picture comes. We're in big trouble. Our country has a lot of structural problems, regardless of who's in office. We've got to really think about that because there's a lot of things that we have to do as well. And certainly, policies can be put in place to help us, but there are things that we have to do to be able to capitalize on it. And then power forward, as I played power forward, most of us don't have life insurance. The average black family has only $50,000 in life insurance. That's it. What happens when you're not? My wife is back there. I want my family to continue to go on long after I'm gone. So we have to think about that life insurance. Insurance is very important in many different aspects of insurance. And obviously, the center position, which most people think of, is very important. A lot of us, and I'm sure in this room, we do not have a basic will in place in terms of who gets what. I'm going to tell you something. I preside over many, many families as a certified financial planner. And when you don't have things spelled out, it is the nastiest thing you'll see. People will fight. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Tooth and nail over assets. No, daddy promised me this. No, mommy promised me this. If it's not spelled out in a legal document, the court will decide who gets what. That's called dying intestate. Dying intestate. And then also there's others too. If you have children, you need a guardianship of your children. You need guardianship. It's very, very important. And then also a financial power of attorney. You need a financial power of attorney if something happens. Who's going to make decisions on your behalf, particularly if you're a single parent? And here's a big one, the healthcare power of attorney. Who's going to make decisions on your behalf if you pass away? That happened to me. Got a call, having a meeting about my nonprofit organization with some city workers in Columbus, Ohio. My sister says, you got to come to the hospital. My mom was about to pass away. I'm the youngest of 4, as I mentioned to you, but I'm the most responsible out of all of my siblings. Nothing could happen until I came there because I had a healthcare power of attorney. They asked me, do you want to continue with your mom and you want to take her off of life support? I said, absolutely. I want to continue her and give her a chance at life. But somebody needs to make those decisions. I just gave you a lot. I threw a lot out at you. We talked about savings. But the first thing you have to do is you have to plan. Many of us, we're just winging it. and it's to our detriment.
Could I also jump in and add something to that? When you were talking, I was just thinking about those numbers you were mentioning. That's for all Americans on the survey, right? That's not even Black Americans.
So our numbers are worse.
Right. So the numbers for Black Americans who don't have a safety net cushion, I'm sure for all non-white Americans, honestly, is even worse than the ones that Keevan was talking about. And the thing that comes to mind for me with that, in addition to planning, taking control of your assets, thinking about all these other opportunities and options, is that to me that just says people aren't making enough money.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important to stress that the answer to that is not necessarily go get a higher paying job. People should seek higher paying jobs, right? You should seek what you're worth. That's the way the system that we're living in is working. But when I hear a number like that so many Americans, so many of them are working full time, don't have $500 for an unexpected health emergency, don't have $250 to fix something on their car so they can get to work, or so they can even afford to get to work for that week. What I hear is that, but then it's like, you look at these numbers, and I have some charts that I would be happy to show you. If you look at these numbers, productivity has been increasing steadily for 40 years, 50 years, right? With a little bit of sluggish growth occasionally, but overall the output that all people are putting into the U.S. economy continues going up. Corporate profits are at an all-time high, right? We're recovering every day, pushing towards full employment since the end of the Great Recession since the beginning of the Great Recession almost 10 years ago, right? And yet people still don't have that money, right? And so I think this is an example kind of what Bill was alluding to about individual choices are important and personal choices, but to change things on this macro level, to get that needle to move, people need to be making more money, and that is from all places, right? Why is it that corporate profits are at an all-time high? That the CEO, so EPI does a report every year on CEO pay compared to the pay of the average worker in the U.S. Last year, historical context. So around the 60s, I believe, this ratio was about 50 to 1. The typical Fortune 500 CEO made 50 times the typical worker. Does anyone want to over/under 100 to 1 on what the ratio was in last year? It wasn't that crazy. We're talking about, we're talking about multipliers. Last year it was 276 to 1.
Wow.
This year it's over 300 to 1, right? So it's like more and more of the economic output that workers are producing for society is going to not just the top 10%, but the top 1%, right? So I think we need to think about why that is. Why is it that the benefits of a booming economy are not being shared with all of the people, right? And there's a bunch of reasons that go into that. I mean, not just for the Black community, but outside of it, right? Like declining unionization, a stagnant minimum wage, changes in business practices, all these other things. And I want to stress that because I think Lawrence and Bill and others have mentioned today that, education alone, right? Like Black folks are getting degrees at crazier rates than ever before, particularly Black women, putting in more work hours, and it's simply not being reflected in pay, right? So I think I do just want to stress that kind of the issue of political power, not just about where you choose to spend money and everything, but who you're putting into office, what they're doing with those tax bills and the tax code. How are they incentivizing? When was the last time the federal minimum wage was raised? When was the last time we were looking at all of these issues about, power just kind of being taken away from people who are already on the bottom? I think education, saving, improvement, all of those things can go a long way towards dealing with that basic insecurity of not having $500 for a serious health emergency. But a lot of it has to be on a larger scale than that, and I think that's just important to keep in mind.
In our little think tank, I'm going to throw this to Charles a second, but our motto is the best poverty program is a good job. That's why we focus.
A good job, not just a job.
But no, we work with kids. Charles does. We work with Charles on some of this stuff. Is that in the energy industry, the people who put up utility lines, almost all of them are white. 1% of them are Black. It's a $100,000 a year job with no education. 1 month ago, we graduated 4 kids from a community college 5-week program. They've been working full time for 3 straight weeks. They haven't had a day off. Now with the storm, they'll be working. So they'll make $120,000, $125,000 at 18 years old. Absolutely. So you need to go down to North Carolina to talk about the plane. But you've done it. I know you've put some.
Let me get to the micro. We can't even. We need a foundation, and so the segue for me really is going to be what are the strategies and really more so the mindset that we have to look at careers / jobs, especially for us. You know, with access to technology and seeing other people and how they're making money, it can influence how we look at work and look at jobs themselves. So I'll say to those who have that entrepreneurial mind, in addition to those who are looking for work, that if that's the case, then look at the job as your investor. Look at the job as your investor. They're basically fronting you money, keeping you afloat, while you're putting together the plan that you want to use or create with your own entrepreneurial mind. Let them cover your health coverage. Let them cover your pay. Take the thirst and the pressure on having to close that deal off of yourself, because you know you have a baseline amount of money coming in, right? So that's the first thing I want to speak to about that, is the fact that how we look at work and how we look at a job. The other thing is, from a strategic standpoint, there are excuses that are being floated as to why we're not being hired. There are excuses. Mainly, we can't find the talent. They don't have the skills. They don't have the credentials. Okay? So this is what I've been working with Congressman Rush and Keevan over the years, is removing the excuses and the barriers. So let's take the individuals, the skills, and this is why I'd say we go back to this awareness and then access. We need to go into our communities who have these positions of having jobs or having the pathways to get to the jobs and take it to the people. Most people aren't going to go to your nice big building downtown to find that you have all these flyers and programs and programs and programs. They're not using their data to look up on your website to find that you might have all of these careers. You have to go to where the people are with the careers and the jobs. This also means that we have to change the mindset on what success looks like and what a job should and could be. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do in order to do what you want to do. You have to do what you have to do what you want to do. So that means sometimes stepping back to step up. That may mean some physical labor type of occupations, which will then allow you now that funding and source to where you can take advantage of some of the other things we talked about, the benefits. In this energy career sector, in the construction career sector, there are traditionally companies who are doing tuition reimbursement. So now you're making what we know to be starting at $15 and $20 an hour. And you're getting that hourly, and you're a full-time employee. You're getting those benefits like the 401k and those retirement investments, in addition to being able to go to college if you choose to do that, and not have any debt as you're getting your degree. That's its own step right there. Now, with that said, I'm also sharing that the credentials themselves have to matter to you. The credentials, we're talking about, this is, I'm biased here. The biggest gap right now is a skilled labor force. Skilled. And I'm saying that because for a lot of us in our community, we don't have the option of college. So when you go to that post-secondary look at what you're going to do next, I'm saying we have to make something that's been unsexy, sexy. Skilled labor. There's a major move. Congressman Rush has been huge. We're talking about the vocations in high school. And making that something that we put more emphasis and energy into, because it's lost. And I'm sharing this because these companies cannot keep making money without having skilled laborers to do the job. So you have this shrinking pool of skilled laborers. There's now a bidding war. The only way that they can get you to come to their job is to pay more money. They're pulling from the same pool of people. So what do? This gives us an unprecedented opportunity to now have access, because they don't care about color anymore. Can you make the money? Can you do the job? Are you skilled or credentialed to do the job? I'm saying this to you because some of you are out of work. Some of you have nephews, sons, nieces, where you're like, do I send him to school? Do I send her to school and spend $200 grand? And this was with all due respect for a liberal arts degree. And they end up being a manager at a Rite Aid or Walgreens, and I'm going to say this again, you cannot pay back $200,000 on a salary of an assistant manager at Walmart. Especially when you could have probably gotten that job without the degree. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, the focus of how we even look at work and the pathways to the work. So I'm saying even in the position that I have now, there are credentials that are necessary. Carpentry, electrical, plumbing.
Hey, Charles, Congressman, did you want to chime in on this? Because you've been working on workforce development a lot.
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
No, I don't necessarily want to chime in on it, except that I totally agree with it that, you know, a few years ago I had a conversation with the railroad industry, and they brought to me how they were really at a great significant deficit simply because their workforce was aging and retiring, and they had no replacement. And so I was interested in that. I tried to promote that more improvement into the skilled labor going into the railroad industry. There are a number of other industries like the electrical workers in my district in Chicago. They have the same problem with licensed electricians. They are aging, the whites are aging, they're retiring. Their sons and daughters have benefited from college education and upwardly mobile jobs and white-collar jobs, so they're not interested in doing blue-collar work. So the electrical unions are hurting for employing apprentices and people to come in and do that kind of work. And that's how we started in Chicago, which is one of the good things that Ron Emmanuel worked with me on, and we got a company. We turned the old Dunbar Vocational High School, we reopened it, put skilled labor education in those schools, and the electrical union bought a vacant grade school next door to it, and opened up their union hall there. So you have a high school right next to it with a lot of focus on skills training, and then you got the union hall right next to that, and it's right in the center where all the trade shows and the development in the South Side is coming. So there's a ready-made burgeoning labor field there. And just to underline what you said, I remember some years ago, maybe 25 years ago, I visited Dunbar, and I was astounded to find one day something introduced me to a young African-American male who was a singer in Dunbar, and he had just won the state competition for masonry. All right, and when he graduated from Dunbar, he was going to start a job making $75 an hour as a bricklayer. All right, now, and so all the others, children, they're on their way trying to get into college. But this young man, out of high school, was making $75 an hour. And so that's kind of underlined what you're saying. We got to turn back to those kind of professions. And, my experience and what I see, I the same thing everybody else sees. We have to have eyes to see and ears to hear. Right? When you walk into any business, mostly in the African community, even in those lower level jobs, and you go into a restaurant, the cooks are non-black, probably Hispanic, the owners are non-black, the waiters and waitresses are non-black, but yet you still the customers, the people sitting there eating, most of them are black. There's something wrong with that. And so it's that kind of and this is all a part of our economy. Now, I really, since I got the microphone, you should never give a I try to keep my mouth shut. Don't give a preacher and a politician the microphone.
I thought you were waiting a little bit. Okay, never mind.
I got two areas that I really want somebody to touch on. All right. I feel as though in order for the African American community to really achieve its potential, then we have to look not just look at what happens in America, but we have to look beyond America. If we ignore Africa, the Caribbean, South America, and other places, including Europe, then we're missing a big part of the solution to our problem. So I want somebody to address that. And I also want somebody to address, if you will, the structural identity in the African American community, the structural foundation of that African American community. I maintain that the African American community is very well organized and don't know the level of its organization, and there's no cohesion among its organization. However, I think that the church itself, I wish somebody would, address and speak to me at time to this idea about where the church is, and the church redefine, realign, and rediscovering its mission. And that has always been the mission in the African American community, and especially in terms of the cultural impact. And I believe that we are a prophetic people. We're an Old Testament people with a New Testament attitude. And how can we build upon that in order to help us solve these problems?
Can I say something about the church piece?
Mr. Congressman, could you give it? Thank you. Just for a minute. I've been working with Congressman Rush for 25 years. So I'm just going to make a point. Mr. Cunningham, your three what will work is missing one. And the biggest one that is staring us right in our face, and it's so important because of Bobby Rush in media, okay? So let me put the biggest one is politics, right now, okay? Finance. If we get the House back, who's going to be the chairwoman of the Finance Committee, the Banking Committee? Maxine Waters, right? You know what Maxine's going to do, right? Okay. Legal. We lost John Conyers, but there are other senior members of the Black Caucus that are going to be on the Judiciary Committee in very significant roles. Media. My man Bobby. When we were working, we had 600 black radio stations, 25 black network television stations. And that's just one of the issues that Bobby has advanced, and we work together on that. We're here at the Congressional Black Caucus, and I haven't heard nothing against the parties on the trip, on the dais. This is politics right now. So go back to Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas, anywhere, vote for Democrats, even if they may not be the best Democrats and that you can have. And there's some other small, political groups. But don't get tricked by wasting your vote on somebody that can't win and then lose by 2% or less than 2%. We need to take over the House, and we can do it. I woke up this morning saying, wow, we're in the opportunity. And
so let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, that's fine. But that's fine.
No. This is because it's a very important point about elections and everything. But Donald Trump got elected with more people voting against him, voting for him. And if you get down, you dig into the communities you're in, you got to figure out how relevant have we become or irrelevant have we become to the lives of the kids. Like, we travel all over the country, and the labor unions have abandoned, the churches have abandoned. I mean, the need of people is much bigger than just a few votes. I mean, we are not connecting the people in their daily lives. When those stats, first time I saw those data points about how people didn't have $1,000, I'd said to a minister, his eyes kind of rolled. He couldn't even understand that most people, I say that number to them, they can't even understand that it exists. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's like, 1,000, what does that mean? It means that everybody in the country is broke, right? And that no one's talking about how to get unbroke. And so, anyway.
That's finance, legal, and media. The Congressional Black Caucus will do what they should do, maybe not everything, but it'll be a very positive event. If we take back the House, I yield back.
So you guys are going to address
the one part I wanted to really address on the church side, and Congressman, this is again, because I'm speaking for probably this current generation and some behind. Trust ain't there.
Yeah.
Trust ain't there, and it really is, because again you're starting to see things. You're seeing excess occur with the leaders of some of these churches, and it used to be something that stayed local, it stayed in the neighborhood. Social media, technology has changed where you are watching people for what. Bottom line, we're woke now. And so having access to things allows us to now see that certain things and the abuses, and it's not allowing one to look at the church as what it used to be. It looks more like a place where you're just dumping money and you're not seeing the return in the environment or the neighborhood. I'm giving you, this is again a macro. Are there some? Of course, are there some? Absolutely. But I'm watching big churches be built, and you're looking at dilapidated, low, and if that doesn't change, you will not see the church be the anchor that it used to be for people. If they're not giving of what they have versus getting another Bentley, then I'm telling you that it's not going to be seen with the regard that our parents saw it.
They all start with a P. There's the prosperity gospel. That's preached. Hold on. This preached. You name it, you claim it, you go get it, and then someone, look, I played in NBA, make millions of dollars playing basketball a year. Okay, so I understand. But a lot of people need help on a basic level. And I tell people there's a big difference between inspiration and emancipation. Inspiration will make you feel good, but emancipation will make you feel good and better off. So we need some true emancipators in our churches, in our community, regardless of whatever your faith, whatever you choose to do. We need some emancipators. Because even though we're free, we haven't truly been emancipated as a people yet. That's right. And that's real. We have the prosperity gospel. We also have those who, the poverty gospel. The closer you are to God will depend on how poor you are. That's not true. That's not true. That's not true, because then you don't want to maximize the talents that God has placed inside of you, because you say, I'm poor, then so what does that matter? But what I'm after is a posterity gospel message, meaning that there's something that you have to leave behind. There has to be a legacy. When we think all in the Bible, there has to be something that we leave behind. And I take churches to task a lot because they are not emancipating people. And a big thing is where you have a racial component, which we're talking about, we also have a social class component. Where you come into church, I grew up in poverty. A lot of you maybe grew up in the middle class and then affluent. So you bring in, particularly poor in the middle class, you bring in your social class hang-ups into this experience to worship God. But when you have that societal construct, if you never deal with that and address that, the pastors can only take people where they currently are. You cannot take them to the promised land if you're in the wilderness.
Amen. Great.
So we have to really hold our churches accountable because they are in many ways irrelevant to the younger generation. They're irrelevant. And that is a very dangerous thing in the times that we live in today, politically, social, relational, etc. So we have to hold our churches accountable, but then again, most of our church leaderships, they don't really know either what's going on. So they're just trying to get people back each week. So we have to hold each other accountable.
You have to educate the church, people in the church.
Absolutely.
So, like me, I'm an advocate. I can't even vote. However, I make sure in my area I go to different churches within the area and give out pastor packages to see people in the church. You know, and I'm a younger generation too, so you just have to enlighten your generation and get more people that are more accurate into the church.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, in fact, I think it dovetails perfectly with the point that our audience member just made. I was going to say, when Lawrence was talking about making sure that the church is engaged, finding a place that communities can gather is always going to be really important, whether it's the church or something else, like going forward into the future. But this question of kind of, I'm going to call it like political empowerment, not necessarily like who you're voting for in this one particular election or, what's going to happen on a particular issue, but, you hear anecdotes, right? We all have experienced a church that will collect codes for drives or soup cans or whatever else year after year and is not questioning why we still have to collect codes or why we still have to collect codes. What is the to actually move the needle rather than to do kind of acts of charity. And I think that's true not just in the church, but in lots of our even secular community institutions, which is something I'll keep in mind. Sorry.
I have a question. I'm from Dallas, Texas.
I'm from Fort Worth, so that's good.
Access to banks.
Can't hear you.
Speak into it.
Okay, access to banks. For years, I ran convenience stores in Dallas. I financed my first convenience store by selling a Mercedes-Benz that looked just like Sue Ellen's in Dallas. That's the way I opened my first convenience store. And since then, in the past 25 years that I run convenience stores, I have never borrowed money from a bank. I could not. They would not loan me money. How do I run a demolition company in Dallas and subcontract to tear a building down in Houston and have to pay my subcontractors, and how do I do that if I can't go to a black bank? I'm thinking smart people like you should be able to consist all this money in one place. And just like I was in Los Angeles one time, and one of my employees called me and said, "Say, Billy, this here Lone Star this here Western Union, which I sold Western Union money, they're going to debit my account for $35,000 and it's short." I walked in a Wells Fargo bank and transferred the money from one account to another. How would I do that here? If I'm here in Washington, D.C., and an employee called me in Dallas and said, "We need some money over here," how would I do that if I were a black bank? So all these trillions of dollars that the black banks have, they don't have access to it. And smart people like you should be able to get something like that. Get them all together and say, "Look, here it is right here. This credit card is good on this black bank in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Houston, or wherever I go, I should be able to get a bank." And for years, I've tried to borrow money from banks, and they put you on this paper treadmill. Your mother's birth account, where she was born, paid me the tax all your life, and that stuff. And the last thing I want to say is right here, I sold a store to a white boy for $250,000. He went to the Small Business Administration, had the money in 6 weeks. Just to prove that it was discriminatory, I tried to borrow $50,000 and they would not put me on the Small Business account. The last 15 years when I was in business, I had my sister and them to audit my accounts for 15 years. I had run $25 million from that bank.
Yeah, well, you know, hats off to you. Did you want to say something?
Let me just quickly say, you know, the one part that I think you were missing, and I'm not sure what congressional district you live in, but this is a role that maybe your congressman could help you with, especially in terms of the SBA. You know, learn how to use your elected officials. All right, because they're sitting in some really pretty strategic and powerful position. They can get a meeting with the head of SBA to talk specifically about your loan, all right, and get them to give you as much consideration as they give anybody else if, in fact, you brought it to them. So learn how to use your elected officials. If I had been your congressman, you had come to me, there's no way that I would not have the SBA administrator or their regional administrator sitting in front of you and giving them the message that I'm with you and that they better consider you and be fair to you. That's really what I'm talking about.
Well, I certainly second the congressman said. So what I've seen work is reaching out to a pool of high net worth. This is the only thing that's ever worked for me. High net worth African American individuals who have been the one. There's a network. There's a network of people who actually, brothers, who actually have money, who do factor, finance. It's hard to find that group. It's hard to get in, I know. But that's one thing I'm saying. I would say the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce, you probably have gone there, you probably know those guys, another source. United Bank, which is the black bank in Houston. Now, in terms of the money transfer issue, I'm going to suggest something which is a little on the edge. It's going to get me in trouble.
Okay, the Howard blockchain?
Yeah, I was going to suggest Bitcoin. And some of the, if you have, just hear me out here, Jesus. This is like my comment about Howard. I'm moving toward the door.
So I'm going to say this in Bill's defense. He has been a blockchain proponent expert for years. But obviously, you can't ask him a question about blockchain until the end of the event. Because we'll say that someone can come afterwards, go afterwards and ask him, spend about an hour with him on the blockchain.
There are some new technologies that are being put into place. If you have younger people on your staff or in your family that you can assign to this, I would say that's probably the way to go. The platform is Coinbase. Coinbase.com is the one that everybody's using. But look at some of these newer technologies.
I still think the issue he's talking about is the banks are operating in silos, and there's no interconnectivity between them like you can get with a Wells Fargo who has branches everywhere, and it can just be transferred. So I guess that's the proposition, is can a framework be put in place so that the banks are talking to each other and allowing those transactions to go in between them? Can you have a card that is accepted within them? That's the real question, is there a willingness from black banks to come to the table, the heads of them, and have that conversation?
Well, hold on. Lauren, do you have the financial expert?
I wanted to answer the question. There's a black bank in New Orleans called Liberty Bank that has a credit card created specifically for black businesses, 9% interest rate, 550 credit score. Call up the United States Black Chamber here in D.C. They'll connect you. You can do the application online. So there is access to capital. As far as the Bitcoin thing, I'm just going to say no. And I'm going to say no because we cannot afford, as a community with minimal wealth, to try to do makeup investment because of what we didn't do for 25 years. You can't catch up like that. It ain't going to happen. Okay? There is no magic bullet. Okay? That's just the rule.
I don't think that was, just respectfully, I don't think it was being asked to be looked upon as an investment tool. I think it was being looked upon as a way to transfer dollars.
I wasn't talking about, I'm talking Bitcoin as a concept for our community. When we got into this and the drop happened 4 months later and people's lives were devastated because they were borrowing against their homes and real assets to try to do makeup investment. There's no quick way to create wealth. It is a slow and steady process. Roland, you tell me.
And look, I agree with you wholeheartedly with her saying. This was the same thing that happened in the years leading up to the financial crisis. There were a bunch of brothers who came into Prince George's County and told, this was probably about 10 years ago, told black homeowners to buy houses and get these, they were going to get another house, the house was going to go up, and these were black people. And of course, they devastated the community. They were working in concert with Wells Fargo Bank to make those loans to devastate Prince George's County, which was the wealthiest black county. So I agree with you, Harlan. On the Bitcoin thing, however, this is the last thing I'll say. About it. All right. Here's the deal. Our economic models, which predicted that Trump was going to win, also now predict that there is going to be a hack of a major financial institution. Okay? I would say we don't know who it's going to be. I would say it's going to be Wells Fargo, but we don't know who it's going to be. Listen to this very carefully. Okay? What's going to happen is people are going to move to these alternative payment mechanisms once that hack happens. Okay? It's not an overnight thing. Everything isn't going to rush from US dollars to Bitcoin. That's not the way this stuff works. But if you're not in place now, or at least if you don't understand how the thing works, and if you're not completely frightened of it, then you're going to have a harder time making that move. Moving some portion, a small portion. I'm not talking about $10,000, $20,000. I'm talking about $100, okay? Or $200, just so you understand how the Bitcoin moves. When that hack happens, our models predict that it will happen within the next 6 to 9 months. Okay? You're going to see major volatility in the financial marketplace, and the economy will probably start to turn down. Go ahead. That's all I'm saying.
If I might change the subject.
Yes, please.
There's a new movement called the FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early. It was in the New York Times actually in the past week. Some folks that are retiring early at younger ages. It's very interesting. But to retire early, you have to have a job and maybe even a retirement account. And unemployment in black communities is 100% higher than it is in the white community. So I asked a lot of my friends, I'm 36 years old. I asked my generation, folks in their mid-30s, how many hiring managers do you know? To get a job, you have to probably either apply cold or know some hiring managers. And the average number that I hear, just anecdotal evidence here, the average is 5 hiring managers. I put a prompt to all of us to get to know hiring, and beyond just getting to know hiring managers. Strive to be one. With your own money, strive to develop your own wealth and go into your community and find someone that you can hire, and if possible, get them a full-time job. Minimum wage here in D.C. is $13.25. That's $27,000 a year. If one day down the line, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you can hire someone and give them $27,000 to do a good job at whatever that is, hire them. Use your own cash. And if you don't know how, become a hiring manager. I'd like to see out of my 100 friends, 80 of them are hiring managers, right? Put that on the table for us.
Let me just say, if you don't understand any investment vehicle, don't invest. If you don't understand, you're not going to put the homework in to due diligence, don't do it. I don't care what it is. That's my advice. And I tell, especially black folks, invest in what you know. I remember the first time I met my wife, they're from a small town about an hour south of Columbus. I told you I have an infatuation with refrigerators. So, yeah, you know where I'm going. So I went to the house, and I want to see how they living down here. And what I saw in there was, and I do not drink pop, but what I saw was a lot of, what pop do you think they had in there? Coca-Cola. Pepsi. Black folks like Pepsi because it's sweet. And I said to him, and I said, Pops, I said, this is not an endorsement for Pepsi or Coke or any of them. I don't drink soft drinks, but I said, just think if you would have invested $50 a month back in the 1980s, just in Coke, just in Pepsi stock, how much you would have had today. He's retired in dividend income. A dividend, you get a dividend when you buy a share of stock, and then you get it. They pay you basically, it's basically interest on you invested in, and they give you a guaranteed amount, or not a guaranteed amount, but a certain percentage. And had he done that, he said, I would have been way ahead of the ball game. And then he said to me, nobody ever showed me or told me. You don't have to do all kind of crazy things. You don't have to do that. What you need to do is you need to invest in what you know. Many of us, we make all these companies rich. We spend more, we didn't talk about this, more per capita on any ethnic group in food, entertainment, and clothing. So we have to really think about where we spend our dollars will determine probably more than likely where you probably want to invest, because you invest in what you know. But be very careful, whatever it is, invest in things that you're comfortable in. That would be my recommendation to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, hi. My name is Reginald. I live in the local area, Prince George's County. Brother with the investment research. Well, what's the website? Because I want to get more information. And I have a comment on one of the points you made about a macroeconomic strategy to boost black wealth. One of the strategies you mentioned is independent media platform. There are three independent media platforms that I know that are available for access. One is Mr. Roland Martin. He used to have his own show on News One, TV One. He now has his own media platform that's strictly online. It's called Roland Martin Unfiltered, I believe. You can look him up. The second one is a black-owned media startup called Kweli.tv, KWELI.tv, and they're based in the DMV. And the last one is based in Atlanta. It's a black-owned media startup. It's called Black on Purpose Network TV. They're based in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.
So the website, by the way, is creativeinvest.com.
Thank you.
Creativeinvest.com. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
So I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't come up and just say we are pretty good at serving the black church, but in reality, the black church has probably done more for any of us than we do now. I just came to mind a trip that I took down to Savannah, and I went to the first African-American church in the U.S., and it has, in that church, a very old building, writings of the first African recorded known here in the U.S., and that's a powerful thing to see. Related to the black church, what I want to say is give a shout out to my church, Eastern Star Church in Indianapolis. It's in the 46214 area code. It's the poorest district, food deserts. So my church has, it took a long time. We wish we had done it earlier. But my church has bought up old, beat up homes in the area, sold them back at affordable mortgages, started a credit union, created a grocery store, addressing the issues. That's what church doing that. We build hospitals in this country. We need to stop beating up churches, get away from the pastors who are doing it wrong, and go to the place and worship the Lord. That's what it's about. Okay. So I have a question. Yeah. So I did have a question. And Samantha, thank you for all of the information that you shared. Can policy address how we rebuild our communities? When gentrification comes in, we see all of our communities that we have all these issues in. I'm from the south side of Chicago. We went to the same high school. Go Eagles, Lynn Bloom. Yes. And thank you, Representative Bobby Rush. OG for real. We'll be so excited. Yes, he's for real, OG. So can policy address rebuilding our communities?
Thank you for your question. It might be a trick question because I think the answer is nothing can rebuild anything alone. I think policy is responsible for shaping the way that a lot of our communities took shape and the way that they have played out and the way they are. I mean, even, I'm going to maybe oversimplify a very smart person's like PhD research into like one sentence here, but even the reason that the church has historically been so significant in many ways, aside from like, you know, our values and faith and everything else, is that there were not other institutions where black folks could gather, could have meetings, could raise money, could come together and talk about political power, and like in many ways the church filled that void. So, no, I don't think policy alone can solve all of the problems of our communities, but I think maybe it's also worth thinking about what will the communities of the future look like, right? Like the reason our communities are being, and actually, you know, I should correct because I actually did not grow up in like many of like the urban areas, right, that are being like affected by gentrification, right? I grew up in the suburbs, but and that's another point, sorry, that I just want to make, right? Like we're not homogenous, right? Like everybody has lots of different experiences. Every part of the country is different. We have multiple religions in the black community, right? We got Afro-Latinos, we got Afro-Asians, everyone else, right? We're all part of a diaspora, so I don't want to ever like overgeneralize and say all things are one way or all things are the other, or this is the one way to deal with the community. But it's like many of the reasons that black communities, especially in urban areas, right, like here in DC where I live, become those black communities is because of segregation, because of housing redlining, because of lack of opportunities, because of lack of wealth to move to other places. And then when white flight occurred, right, white families, white households were being given federally guaranteed loans to go out and build these, you know, beautiful like Levittown suburbs and all that stuff. And so I don't say any of that to say that like things cannot be exactly the same way that they were, right, or that we shouldn't try to preserve like the areas that have been right. But it's like policy definitely took us into a lot of those spaces, right? It's not just an individual discriminatory landlord or an individual discriminatory bank or anything. It's like systems and laws that politicians pass to prop up those systems over time. So I don't think we can ignore policy in coming out of it, right? Because that also affects churches. I mean, I live in Shaw, right? I'm going to walk home after this, right? I'm lucky enough to live close by, right, in the shadow of Howard University. And it's like 2 churches have closed down in the last 2 years, right? A black-owned daycare closed down in the neighborhood recently, right? So it's, you know, and at the same time that all of this supposed like economic revitalization is happening to the community. So it's like, you know, and some of that is because of economic development policies of the city, right? The choices that people make about where to live, all of the piled up choices that we've heard about what banks choose to lend to what businesses, you know, why do they do that? You know, racism, absolutely, and also because the law made it easy. So I just think absolutely we need to look into our own communities, we need to revitalize both our houses of worship and I think our secular spaces, because I think that is, this is not me speaking as an economic policy person, this is just my personal opinion, but it's like, I think one of the ways that we can be, that we need to make sure that we can, I think, work together and collaborate to lift all boats is to make sure that people who are not all on the same, you know, coming from the same background can still feel like included in the black community and, you know, reach out to other houses of worship, reach out to other denominations, come together like the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina that's been really inspiring across all of those lines, you know, but I think we can't also do it without marshaling political power. I think it matters who's in charge and it matters what laws are passed and it matters whether those advance us forward or repair for some of the damage that has been done to folks in the past, you know. That's it, you know, so it's like when you say, let's revitalize a community, like absolutely that requires folks in the community banding together to address issues like food deserts. You gotta fix the schools, you gotta, you know, be engaged in education, you gotta do the banking, you gotta show up, and you gotta go to the city council meetings so that they don't sell the whole unit out from under you, you know. So I think it all definitely works together.
Can you have the microphone, please?
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. My name is Martin Smith. I'm at Howard University, so be careful when I meet you. You know. Sir, forgive me, what's your name? Lawrence. Lawrence, okay. So this is a phenomenal panel. I'm also a financial advisor. I launched an investment firm some years ago. I want to get your feedback on this.
because I've heard, as you know, in the business, you hear a lot of get-rich-quick schemes and a lot of, you know, how about this, how about that, you know, the next hottest stock, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to throw this out there and have you respond. I think there are like 3 primary large asset lump sum events that we have in our communities. One, when you sell a house, and probably for the first time ever, through the baby boom generation, retirement, because my mother started investing in her 401k when she was in her 40s. My grandfather didn't, right? So a lot of us are first 1.5 generation investors. And then that third lump sum is probably going to be life insurance proceeds. And I wanted to ask about restoring wealth, you know, to the black community. But looking down the corridor, maybe 2 or 3 generations, if you could offer your insight about how to use life insurance as a way to restore wealth, if we can be patient enough to invest those proceeds correctly.
Well, I mean, life insurance is a big issue. I mean, not just for your home taken care of, but also maybe you do it in the beneficiaries of a church or an organization. There are a lot of different things that you can do. But I think, again, holistically, me, I'm a CFP. I don't sell any products or anything like that. I just sell plans. You got to be comprehensive. And that's where I started in. A lot of these folks are experts, you know, much more than me, and I just stick to the script. And if you have the right game plan and playbook, more than likely you're going to have success.